Our Across the Aisle segment tonight. Memos written by former FBI Director James Comey were released last Thursday. Now, Comey originally leaked the memos to prompt the special counsel investigation into President Trump. And now we finally get to see the contents of the memos, albeit in redacted form. Republican Congressman Devin Nunes, Bob Goodlatte, and Trey Gowdy all ripped Comey for the memo, saying in a joint statement that the memos, quote, show the president made clear he wanted allegations of collusion, coordination, and conspiracy between his campaign and Russia fully investigated. With me now, history professor and author of Obama's America, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, good to see you.
Good to see you again, Liz.
All right, Ian, talk to me about the premise here, because this is where I guess it gets sticky for me. Comey originally said he leaked these memos to his friend because he feared the president was trying to obstruct justice in any investigation into Russian collusion in the election. He feared obstruction of justice. He released these memos to the media months ago as proof, he said, that the president tried to obstruct justice. Ian, we've read these memos now. There's only 15 pages of them. There's not even a single mention in the memos that Comey was ever worried about the president threatening him or obstructing justice in any way.
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm no fan of James Comey. He's got an ego every bit as large as his 6'8" frame. He threw the election to President Trump by ignoring 6 decades of Department of Justice policy and commenting on an ongoing investigation that had nothing to do with literally anything. But that aside, he may have a big ego, but he does have some credibility when it comes to accuracy. Judgment, maybe not, but accuracy. Those memos are almost essentially word for word the same as the testimony he gave to Congress and the same as what he wrote in the book. And remember, when he wrote the book, he didn't have access to the memos because they'd been turned over to the FBI. What they show is that the president essentially asked him to back off from Michael Flynn. So that is certainly open to interpretation as a possible obstruction of justice. But remember, obstruction of justice is about intent. It doesn't matter whether James Comey actually felt as if he was being obstructed, just like it doesn't matter if I try to threaten you, in a terrible metaphor, if I try to threaten you, if you do X, Y, and Z, then you're gonna get it. It doesn't matter whether you actually felt like I'd carry out that threat, or it doesn't matter whether you ignored that threat and did the right thing and did whatever it was you were trying to do against me. By making that threat, I am obstructing justice, and that's what I would argue we see in the Comey memos and in also the larger discussions, is that the president told James Comey to back off. That's at least open to interpretation as obstruction of justice, and even just firing him.
But James
after
Comey,
the fact Trump said that he fired him to make things easier on Russia. That's obstruction of justice.
No, it's not actually by legal definition, but we'll get to that in a second. James Comey said the reason that he wrote the memos, because this wasn't something that he did habitually for anybody else that he ever met with. He never wrote this type of memos. He said the reason that he wrote this memo is because he worried about the president obstructing justice. So the argument that even if James Comey didn't feel it enough to write it, I don't think that that's a valid argument, because Comey has said in the past that the reason he wrote this was because he felt that the president was acting inappropriately. Yet, if his primary concern, and I'll state this again, if his primary concern was that the president was obstructing justice, I mean, he wrote his opinion into these memos as well. It wasn't just a straight report. You read them yourself. I'm sure you did before coming on this show. You're a college professor. You prep very well with your material. He never mentioned once that he actually felt pressured to do one thing or the other by the president. He said that the president said that he hoped James Comey could let that go, but it wasn't a threat. It wasn't obstruction, and he didn't feel that he had to do it because the president made his opinion clear.
Well, what I read was that he wrote the memos, even though he didn't usually or hadn't before written memos after meeting with presidents, was because he didn't trust this president, because this president had proven himself to be a liar.
So it was based off of his feelings then?
Well, I think I would argue it's based off evidence. I mean, was the inauguration crowd the largest ever? Trump said it was. We know it wasn't. The Washington Post has documented 2,436 occasions where the president has either has told a lie or made a misleading statement.
Right, and we can show a 40-minute reel that we have on tap. We can show a 40-minute reel of President Obama saying 1,000 times that your health insurance premiums are going to go down under Obamacare when they didn't. Be that as it may, politicians aren't always accurate. It's bad, but that is the nature of politics. Let me ask you this. James Comey said the memos weren't classified. We all know that it's a crime to leak classified information. 4 of the 7 were classified. He gave 4 to his friend, who now claims to be his attorney. So by nature, then, at least 1 would have to contain classified information. Why is that not a problem when James Comey does it, if other people in the Department of Justice and the FBI who have done the same thing are now going to prison for that?
Well, the Department of Justice is looking into this, but you've said, and let's see what they have to say about it, but you've said some things that are not backed up by the facts, because I did the research on this as well. Okay, first of all, we know of one memo that he gave to this Professor Richmond for sure, and then there are a couple of others that we're not sure which ones he gave. But here's what you have to remember. There's something called the OCA. I want to get this right. That's the Original Classification Authority. James Comey was the one who determined whether each of those memos was classified. James Comey thus has the authority, as the OCA, to declassify those memos.
He had no authority to declassify anything. He was fired from the FBI.
I read it in print today.
He was fired by the FBI before he released these memos.
It doesn't matter. He had the authority to release the memos. Excuse me, he had the authority to determine what's classified.
Let me ask you this.
Well, then I guess what I read in the print was wrong. But
well,
I think what I read in the
sometimes
print
what
was
you
right.
read in print is wrong. That's good. I'm glad to hear that you're realizing that. Let me ask you this: if this wasn't classified information,
one of us is wrong, so we'll see.
If this wasn't classified information, why was it redacted when it was released publicly? Why was it redacted when we read it?
So that's the second point. A, he can determine what's classified and what's not. B, by releasing a redacted memo, what he's doing is thus he's making it declassified, because he's redacted the parts that are classified. Once the parts that are classified are redacted, the memo is no longer classified. It doesn't contain any classified information. This all goes to his authority as the OCA. President Trump tweeted, "Oh, I didn't declassify it." Well, the president is not the only person who has the authority to declassify. In this case, the director of the FBI,
You're missing a huge point here.
has the authority to declassify.
He wasn't the FBI director when he released these memos. He'd been fired. He wasn't even allowed back in the building. He did this after he'd been fired. The Department of Justice said these memos weren't released earlier because they would interfere with the Mueller investigation. We have now seen them, Ian. They don't interfere with the Mueller investigation. At what point would you, or would Democrats in general, acknowledge that there is such political bias in the Department of Justice, in the FBI, in the Mueller investigation, to render it unfair, when over and over they have made comments, they have made arguments that when we actually get the facts turn out to be completely untrue?
I'm sorry, but if you want to talk about bias, you've got Robert Mueller as a lifelong Republican, James Comey is a lifelong Republican. The FBI was so stacked with Trump Republicans that they were going to leak the Anthony Weiner business even before James Comey did. I'm sorry, but there is...
The letter after your name does not, in and of itself, mean there's no political bias. It's astonishing to me that you would look at Robert Mueller's investigation, even after Mueller himself fired people who worked for him for political bias, and say that there's no concerns with political bias. Unbelievable. Ian, we do have to go. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate the debate.